things that I found most helpful with congregations is an adaptation of George Bullard's Lifecycle of the Church model. And this is an oversimplification, but the church, like every living organism, has a life cycle from birth to death. The thing that Bullard contributes is that at any stage in this process, there are 4 values or 4 priorities that rise to the top and are the primary focus of the congregation. At any given point here, the congregation is dealing with the mission, relationships. I wouldn't know awards for penmanship. I skipped 3rd grade when they were teaching that. Programs, and management or maintenance. And what Bullard says is that in the early days of the church's life, when they're growing and reaching out, the mission or the vision is what is the dominant factor. What that means is that when decisions are made, they're made in terms of how it helps the congregation move forward with their mission. As people begin to come together and the church begins to grow, relationships begin to form. That's not a bad thing, because relationships are a part of what we're about as a church. But the problem becomes that along the way, the relationships that initially have been with people outside the church begin to focus inside the church. And that's when a leveling off or a plateauing, and Bullard's diagram isn't neat like this, his has steps, plateaus. And what happens here is this is when you begin to see decisions made based on how they'll affect people in the congregation. That's when you begin to hear things like, well, we can't do that because this person would be upset, or they would take their money and go home. And then as the church matures, and actually for a lot of churches, what I found is that this is the beginning of the decline, is when programs take priority. And the decisions that are made, not just the budget, but how we're going to use our time and the resources of people in the congregation, begin to be made on the basis of how they'll affect programs. And it's always existing programs and the maintenance of those programs. There are congregations in the Baltimore-Washington Conference, and there are some in the Central Maryland District, for whom the annual ham and oyster dinner is the main focus of the church. And all the decisions that are made throughout the year are based on how that's going to affect our ability to do our annual ham and oyster dinner. That's a recipe for decline. And then eventually, as the decline begins to accelerate, we get down here to where the focus is on maintenance or just keeping the doors open. And as we all know, that's not a recipe for growth. But what I found is that this tool is really helpful both as a diagnostic tool, because you go to congregations and you say, well, where are you on this? And it's a little easier for them sometimes to say, well, we're really focusing primarily on maintenance, or we're all invested in programs, than it is for them to say, well, we're a declining congregation. But in most cases, the two go together. But it's also helpful as a tool for revitalization, because unlike our bodies, churches can be regenerated and can start a new growth cycle. Now obviously it's a lot harder when you're up here than when you're down here. In some cases we just have to recognize it's virtually impossible for a church to be regenerated and revitalized once they get so far down here that all they can think about is maintenance. But up to about this point it's possible, but what happens if that's going to start again is that the focus has to shift back to mission. A church is not going to be regenerated and revitalized if their primary focus and the priority for making decisions is programs or in relationships, unless it's relationships with the people in the mission field, not within the congregation. What it really takes is for a new focus on and commitment to the mission. And in light of our earlier conversation, I'd be so bold to say the same thing goes for a denomination and for an annual conference. That the same thing that can bring revitalization to a local church, I think, has the potential if we rediscover and recommit to what is our mission.